Imagine sitting in a tube-shaped vessel, about the size of a minivan, with 4 other people. You're bolted in, with no way to get out, as your pilot steers through the ocean depths, nearly 4,000 meters below the surface. You can barely breathe because you all have been breathing the same air for hours. It's freezing, there is no power, no heater, there is no GPS, no one on land knows where you are, you have no contact with the outside world. Slowly, you hear the pressure of the water cracking and crushing the submarine. Your captain reassures you that everything is going to be okay. But deep down, you know it's not. The air starts to smell like sweat, vomit, and feces. You start to see little drops of water slowly leaking into the seams of the submarine. The captain tells you not to worry because it's just condensation. But you all know that with limited food, limited water, limited air, and most importantly, limited time, if help doesn't arrive soon, this could be the end of you. Okay, I don't care what anyone says, this has to be the wildest story to have come out of 2023. On Sunday, June 18th, a 6-meter sealed submersible called Titan, built by the company OceanGate, headed into the depths of the sea to explore the remains of the Titanic shipwreck. On board were British aviator Hamish Harding, Shahzada Darood, one of Pakistan's richest men, and his 19-year-old son Suleiman Darood, Paul Henry Nargiolet, who was the pilot of the submersible, being a veteran submarine pilot and a long-time researcher of the Titanic shipwreck, and the CEO of OceanGate himself, Stockton Rush. Each paid $250,000 for a spot in the submersible, except for the CEO, obviously. It was intended to be an 8-hour trip. They went in with 96 hours worth of oxygen supply. So that's the backstory. Before I get into it, I do want to make a disclaimer that as of writing this video, this situation is still ongoing. There is still new information coming out about this every day. But as of now, I think we have enough information to come to a conclusion. We will see. But firstly, the difference between a submarine and a submersible. I've been seeing people online keep referring to Titan as a submarine, although I personally would not go out of my way to correct them because while they both are pretty similar, a submarine has enough power to leave the port and come back on its own. A submersible, on the other hand, has very limited power supply and needs a mothership that can launch and recover it. Titan is a submersible, which makes their situation even more dire and dangerous. About 1 hour 45 minutes into the trip, the submersible lost contact with its operator, and after receiving no contact for nearly 12 hours, it was reported to the United States Coast Guard. As the investigation for this missing submersible began, it was revealed that there were so many red flags since the very beginning. First was the material of the submersible. It wasn't made of any metal or any hard, durable material like most submarines and submersible. It was mostly based on carbon fibers with a dome of titanium. Carbon fiber is a relatively new material that hasn't been tested much in such conditions, so it was very experimental. It is structured in a way that it has a set of woven fibers instead of one solid material, which, while it makes the material super light, it is not very durable and can't withstand too much outside pressure. In a video made a couple months ago where Rush provides a tour of the submersible, it was shown that he had drilled a monitor into the carbon fiber, which puts it at risk for flaking and crumbling. Next is the fact that the entire submersible was being controlled and driven with this $30 Logitech PlayStation 3 game controller. When I first heard this, I had to do a double take, then a triple take. But upon doing a bit more research on this, turns out it's a fairly common practice in the military and in the Navy and is used to operate drones and tanks and other stuff. The reason being is that they're durable. Most younger recruits are familiar with the game controllers and they can be used to operate almost any Microsoft device. But still, in this case, operating the entire submersible with that little controller is a bit reckless. There's this TikToker named MacGyvered who is experienced and has worked around submarines. She made a couple videos giving her thoughts on the situation. Here's a picture of her in a submarine, and just look at all the buttons, all the controls behind her. They had an entire station for driving. This is what it is supposed to look like. Not to mention, this submarine that Mackenzie had worked with is a smaller submarine, only designed to go 45 meters below the water, but usually they only went 30 to 35 meters for safety reasons. Yet there were still so many controls, so many precautions that they had to take. Compare that to Titan that was intended to go 4,000 meters deep into the ocean, being operated with this game controller. Another issue with the game controller that was chosen is that it is wireless. YouTube channel by the name of Submarine, run by Aaron, who has worked in US Navy submarines for 20 years, points out in this video that you really don't want to use wireless controllers underwater as it can lead to connection issues, especially with this specific controller. Logitech G F710 is known for having connection issues. If you go on its Amazon reviews, it's got a bunch of terrible reviews complaining about its awful connection. Speaking of connection, there is no GPS in the submersible, there is no tracking device. Instead, they communicate with the main ship through texting, but the CEO, Stockton Rush, is known for missing his text or taking too long to reply in between text because he wants to live every moment of the trip to the Titanic. He doesn't want to be distracted by something as pointless as safety alert text, which is one of the reasons why when they initially lost contact 1 hour 45 minutes into the trip, they didn't notify or report it straight away, because this is something that has happened before and they thought they were just going to be fine. This CEO, Stockton Rush, was revealed to be an absolute mad lad when it came to safety, and I mean it in the worst way possible. Firstly, he would openly complain about the safety regulations in the submarine industry, claiming that the standards were obscenely safe. At one point, he said this during an interview with the CBS, and I quote, "At some point, safety is just pure waste. I mean, if you just want to be safe, don't get out of bed, don't get in your car, don't do anything. At some point, you are going to take some risk, and it really is a risk-reward question." Last year, journalist David Polk from CBS Sunday Morning actually got the chance to visit Stockton Rush and go down to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to see the remains of the Titanic shipwreck on this submersible. There was a video on this on YouTube, but I think it was removed in light of the current situation, but I was still able to find it on their website. Even during the trip last year, there were so many issues. So much of this submersible seemed improvised and experimental. There were bits of this submersible that were literally being held together with masking tape and Sharpies.
I couldn't help noticing how many pieces of this sub seemed improvised.
It seems like this submersible has some elements of MacGyvery jerry-riggedness. I mean, you're putting construction pipes as ballast.
I don't know if I'd use that description of it, but there's certain things that you want to be buttoned down. So the pressure vessel is not MacGyvered at all, because that's where we work with Boeing and NASA and the University of Washington. Everything else can fail. Your thrusters can go, your lights can go, you're still going to be safe.
I think there is only one button in the entire submersible, and that is to push it down underwater like an elevator. And throughout the video, Rush continues to insist how easy it is to operate this thing, how anyone could do it. It shouldn't take too much skill.
We only have one button, that's it. It should be like an elevator. It shouldn't take a lot of skill.
Says who? You are literally putting people's lives at risk. There is only one toilet in the entire submersible, and that is really just a tiny box with a bottle for you to pee in and some Ziploc bags for feces. But they do suggest you to essentially starve in the days leading up to the trip so that you get accustomed to living on little amounts of food and water and don't need to go to the bathroom as much. The trip is anything but reliable. During the trip last year, they had to cancel it twice. The first time they had to cancel it was while they were only 11 meters underwater because the waves were too harsh, so they had to come back up. Second time around, they lost connection pretty early on during the trip, so they cancelled it and went back to the port. They interviewed this woman named Renata Rojas, who has been trying to get to this trip for 30 years, spending millions of dollars only for it to get cancelled time and time again.
Renata Rojas speaks from painful experience. Over the years, she's been booked on 3 Titanic expeditions. All 3 were cancelled.
You just cry a lot and just keep the dream alive, because it's something that I have to do.
The third time, they finally got lucky and got to see the Titanic, and it was like this huge moment. But the point is, it's not reliable. For the most part, you're at the mercy of your fortune, which is why they make you sign a waiver before you get in, because it hasn't been approved by any regulatory body.
An experimental submersible vessel that has not been approved or certified by any regulatory body and could result in physical injury, disability, emotional trauma, or death. Where do I sign?
One of the reasons it hasn't been approved by any regulations is due to Russia's questionable hiring methods. In one interview, he stated that when he founded OceanGate, there were many ex-Navy people with decades worth of experience working with submarines willing to work with them, but he refused to hire any of them because most of them were 50-year-old white guys who were not inspirational. Instead, they opted for younger, inexperienced college graduates to be a part of their team. This seems so ageist, especially coming from Rush, who is in his 60s. Inspiration is not a regulatory category. Inspiration is subjective. I personally admire the knowledge, the experience, the dedication, passion someone might have working in a specific industry for decades. While hiring inexperienced new graduates is not necessarily a bad thing, you also have to hire people with experience. Some of these 50-year-old white guys who knows their stuff. I think the main reason why he opted for younger, inexperienced candidates is because they're easier to control and manipulate. Their lack of experience meant that they wouldn't know anything better when it comes to safety regulations. They're less likely to stand up for themselves and are therefore would let him get away with cutting corners and doing other sketchy stuff. Because Rush would get seriously offended whenever someone questioned him about safety. Recently, a couple emails between filmmaker Rob McCallum and Stockton Rush were leaked, where McCallum writes to Rush, "You are wanting to use a prototype unclassed technology in a very hostile space. As much as I appreciate entrepreneurship and innovation, you are potentially putting an entire industry at risk." To which Rush replies, "I know that our engineering-focused, innovative approach as opposed to an existing standards compliance-focused design process flies in the face of the submersible orthodoxy, but that is the nature of innovation. I have grown tired of industry players who try to use a safety argument to stop innovation and new entrants from entering the small market. Since Guillermo and I started OceanGate, we have heard the baseless cries of 'you are going to kill someone' way too often. I take this as a serious personal insult." I was gonna say this aged like milk, but I think even milk ages better than this. The search continued the next day, Monday, 19th of June. At this point, it was revealed that the submersible is built in a way that it is meant to float up if it sinks. Ex-Navy officer Timothy James on TikTok stated that that is probably the best case scenario, that instead of being underwater, they're probably floating somewhere on top of the ocean. But with that, there is another issue, which is the fact that the submersible is bolted in from the outside. So once you're inside, there is no way for you to get out unless somebody from outside comes in to get you out. While I understand why they might have done this, as if you're underwater, you don't want any water to get inside the vessel, but still, having no exit is a serious reckless move. Rush claims to have gotten a lot of his inspiration and ideas for his explorations from aviation and spacecraft, but even then, he seems to have forgotten one of the most tragic accidents in the history of astronomy, the Apollo 1. where on January 27, 1967, an electrical short circuit set the entire spacecraft on fire, further exacerbated by the fact that the craft was filled with pure oxygen, just like the Titan submersible, which spread out the fire faster. The Apollo hatch, being held by latches and interior pressure, took at least 90 seconds to open under ideal conditions. This led to all 3 astronauts trapped inside die a tragic death, as there was not enough time to get the hatch open and get everybody out while the fire was rapidly spreading. The fact that Rush got a lot of his inspiration from aviation yet did such a poor job, it honestly makes aviation look terrible. Additionally, the submersible was colored white, which is barely visible on water. If they wanted to be found easily, they could have painted it fluorescent green or some other bright color. At this point, with no GPS, no way of tracking them, with a white submersible, even in the best case scenario, if they were floating on top of the ocean, locating them would literally be like finding a needle in the world's biggest haystack. The third day, June 20th, Tuesday, the search continued. Given the location from which they went missing, at this point, both the US and the Canadian Coast Guards and Navy got involved. This was also the day in which they discovered banging noises underwater from where the submersible went missing in 30-minute intervals. Keep in mind, at this point, their oxygen supply was running out at a rapid rate. All 5 of them were using that small box as the toilet with no way to flush it out because there is no sewage system underwater, so they were all sitting in this tiny vessel about the size of a minivan with a box full of urine and feces with air running out. Apparently they didn't even bring much food or water with them because, like I said at the start, it was supposed to be only an 8-hour trip. I think they only brought a bottle of water and a sandwich each. Now they have been stuck in this tube for 3 days. It is a claustrophobe's nightmare. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if panic and hysteria kicked in at this point, which led to them banging on the door even if it's no use. The searching continued the next day, which was Wednesday, June 21st, and then finally on Thursday, June 22nd, a debris field was discovered within the search area near the Titanic, alongside 5 major pieces of the Titan, including the nose cone and the pressure hull, as well as the tail cone of the submersible about 500 meters from the bow of the wrecked Titanic, suggesting a major implosion. At this point, their oxygen supply would have completely run out anyways, so all 5 passengers have been confirmed dead. None of their bodies have been found yet, to my knowledge. As awful as it may be, this catastrophic implosion that deep into the ocean would have happened in milliseconds. It would have been an instant death, like they would die before their brains are even able to register any pain, so I guess it's not as bad as it could be. It was later come to find out that the US Navy already knew about the implosion this whole time. During the initial loss of contact 1 hour 45 minutes into the trip, their underwater microphones picked up what sounded like an implosion, but still, to be sure, they sent in a search party from both US and Canada. Now that it has been confirmed, this whole search may as well be for nothing. But it did make for a good story though. I mean, over the last week, the entire internet have been glued to this, counting down on how much oxygen there is left, speculating on how they are surviving in that submersible for that long, when in reality, it's likely they didn't even get to live for that long. They imploded within milliseconds before they could even realize what was happening. As tragic as this situation is, so much of it could have been so easily preventable. I keep seeing people bring up the price point, how they paid $250,000 each for what is essentially an underwater coffin. But do keep in mind that these people were incredibly rich. They were billionaires. They were some of the most privileged and wealthiest people on this planet. $250,000 may as well be loose pocket change for them. I think the only person that I genuinely feel bad for is the 19-year-old Suleiman Daroud, who got dragged into this mess by his dad. But for everybody else, Look, while I wouldn't go out of my way to make memes, create merch, or dance on their graves if they even have a grave, after learning everything about this submersible, I'm just apathetic. I just don't have it in me to feel empathy or sympathy. If that makes me a monster, it is what it is. I can't help how I feel. The actual RMS Titanic was described as unsinkable, but on the night that it sunk, Captain Edward James Smith was given several warnings about the bad weather, the icebergs, yet he decided to launch the ship at full force, going 22 knots per hour, which is roughly 40 kilometers per hour. That is really fast for such a huge ship. Allegedly, he was trying to break a speed record, but then ended up hitting an iceberg and sinking the whole ship. So this is just another instance of history repeating itself with powerful men's ego, their hubris, costing people's lives. I'm being reminded of this video made by Mildred from Thought Slime on Elon Musk's takeover on Twitter as the CEO, and a timeline of all of his mistakes and failures and outright disasters, including things like mass layoffs, allowing for impersonations, making cringeworthy skits. But around the 28-minute mark, they make this point.
But I want to address the elephant in the room here, because obviously Elon Musk is going to be fine. He's too rich to ever suffer the type of consequences a human being might face from a bad business deal. He's not going to be in the poorhouse ever. That being said, there is a tendency to assign to Musk and people like him a sort of Machiavellian genius. Well, it seems to you like they're losing because you don't understand the genius of the move he's making. It's four-dimensional chess, baby. He's going to come out on top. This is somewhat because we have trouble accepting that someone with so many resources could be foolish enough to make so many mistakes, that nobody who works for him would point out the problems he is creating for himself or advise a wiser course of action. We would all prefer that there are evil masterminds at the wheel than dummies at the wheel.
And that pretty much sums up everything that I feel about this whole situation. When we look at all these successful, powerful people in our society, the CEOs, the billionaires like Elon Musk and Stockton Rush, we tend to assume that they somehow earned their wealth through hard work, intellect, dedication, whatever, when in reality, most of the time, these are just average people who already came from a background of immense wealth and privilege and just happen to get lucky with their circumstances. They make mistakes and poor judgment just like everybody else, but being in such a position of power means that those mistakes hold higher stakes and end up causing a lot more harm while they remain delusional about their abilities. Leading up to this video, I have been watching a lot of content covering this. Some were very insightful and made by people who knew their stuff about submarines and taught me a lot of new things. Some were simply reporting on the situation, others were shitposting. But there is one video that I came across that might have the wildest take of them all.
There's been a lot of disturbing chatter online from people who mostly don't have profile pictures or posts on their account, saying that somehow because these men are worth millions or billions of dollars, they deserve what they got. But what nobody seems to be acknowledging is that we as a globe are collectively witnessing one of the most fundamental truths about human existence. Privilege doesn't really exist. It's a social construct, if you will. Because as human beings, our circumstances can shift massively in an instant, and that's life. That's how this ride goes for all of us. Every single person watching this video that I'm making right now has infinitely more options and opportunities ahead of them when compared to the men that are in that submarine right now. Their money no longer matters.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I have to disagree. Nobody is saying that those 5 people stuck in that submersible deserved what happened to them. But even if they are, you have to ask yourself, what happened within the past few years in this world that caused people to have such attitude towards the rich that ranges from apathy to open hostility? It can't just be that poor people are just jealous and hate the rich. No, what do you think happened within the last couple years that caused the majority of the working class people to have zero empathy for a billionaire in despair? Privilege may be a social construct, but that does not mean that it isn't real. Because even in that state where 5 of those billionaires were allegedly stuck in the submersible for 4 days, we don't know for sure if they lived that long even. Apparently it imploded 1 hour 45 minutes into the trip. But say even if hypothetically they were stuck in the submersible for 4 days, during that time the whole world practically stopped what they were doing and followed them along, counting down on how much time they have left. Search parties from US, UK, France and Canada were sent looking for them. They spent millions of dollars searching for those 5 men, and guess what? It has been paid by the US taxpayers. Because OceanGate was a private company with no insurance, our hard-earned money that we paid for taxes are covering those expenses. We are literally out here working ourselves to death to pay for billionaires' deadly fantasies while we ourselves can't afford healthcare, can't afford housing, can't afford food, can't get our basic needs met. So forgive me for not having any empathy. Imagine if we spent this much money, time and resources searching for the over 5,000 missing indigenous American women. Or what about the fact that during the same week that the submersible went missing, over 600 migrants fleeing war, environmental disaster, poverty and oppression drowned near Greece. These people didn't get to have a choice. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. They didn't get to sign a waiver saying that they might die. Yet, attempting to rescue those migrants puts you in prison for 20 years, whereas when it came to those 5 billionaires, the US Navy justified the cost by stating, there is no price for human life. The grim reality is, under capitalism, class overrules everything, and that's all I've got. Just leave the Titanic alone. It sunk over 100 years ago. Just leave it alone. It's not some historical site for you to visit. It's a gravesite, and now they are a part of it. But I have to say, they wanted the Titanic experience. I guess they got the Titanic experience.